Penance is in an interesting spot, with most of the attention on her side banner right up Texas the Obotosa, leading very little people to actually discuss her. The limited sentiment that does exist of her, however, paint her as a sidekick to Mudrock, oftentimes inferior due to lack of survivability on heavier hitting enemies. By first taking a very brief look at Penance's kit, we'll first be able to analyze her applications and strengths, then give an overall conclusion to the question, Penance or Mudrock. Of course, there'll be a lot of nuance involved in the comparisons, and if you're here just for my personal take on it, I think that Penance has generally a lower ceiling than Mudrock, but that issue of lower ceiling only comes into play 10 to 20% of the time, and in all other situations, Penance beats Mudrock handily. With that out of the way though, who's Penance, what can she do, and why is she an enmity defender with zero way of self-healing herself? Stats wise, we're looking at a very impressive 4.6k health, 9k attack, and 600 defense. Very much alike Mudrock, however sacrificing a bit of defense for attack. Naturally, Penance also has an incredibly high DP cost of 36 without potentials, however just like Mudrock, she's very much worth it. Her talent one is the bread and butter of her kit, giving her a barrier on deployment and then further gaining barriers when defeating enemies. So how does the barrier system work? Well, Penance's archetype is an enmity defender, meaning that she cannot heal herself in exchange for ridiculously high stats and strong solo ability. If she can't heal herself however, and she has no healing skills unlike Mudrock's shield, how is she even meant to do anything? Well, that's where barrier comes in, wherein she gets a second layer of health that she can regenerate through talent or skills. In this case, this talent gives her 50% of her health as extra health essentially, namely barrier, and gives extra barrier when defeating enemies. This caps out at 300% of her max health, which is a ridiculous amount honestly, because you have the original health pool of 4.5k, multiplying that by 4 we nearly get 20k total health. Naturally, defeating enemies off skill is fairly difficult, as evidenced by Mudrock frequently being unable to hold lanes in skill 3 because her auto attacks simply can't cut it. Penance really wants to defeat those trash enemies without skill though, just to gain the extra barrier, and that's where her second talent comes in. When protected by a barrier, Penance will reflect 50% of her attack back at the attacker. This is the strongest reflect we've seen in the game since, and although every other type of reflect, for example Hoshiguma skill 2 or Nien talent, has been rather mediocre, but the differentiating factor is that this is arts damage, which is inordinately more effective than say Hoshigumo's 400 physical reflect when used against trash ground mobs maybe having 200 to 300 defense, which this talent is explicitly targeted towards. Now onto her skills. Skill 1 and Skill 2 are frankly skills that you'll basically never use. Skill 2 is funny for memes about killing slugs and stuff, and maybe if you have Penance E1 and IS3, you can use it against certain stages. For example, it's fine against this stage with defense crushers and maybe LS4 slug memes. On the other hand, Skill 1 is completely useless in regular content outside of a very interesting meme alongside with Stainless SP battery versus the last night boss. Anyone who's fought it or heard of it will probably know where that is going. So primarily this video will focus on Skill 3. Then Skill 3, what does it do? With a decent 20 SP defensive recovery cost and a 30-second duration, this skill will be up around 50% of the time. It will immediately give you a barrier equals to 130% of your max health, which translated to numbers essentially says gain 6000 health. That's a really big number, but the craziness doesn't stop there. It increases her attack interval by a bit, 1.6 seconds to 2.5 seconds, but then grants a 400% attack increase, raising her attack from a measly 950 to over 4500. The dynamic of the skill works as follows. You place Penance down regularly on some trash mobs, she takes a while to charge her skill up, and in the while she's charging the skill, her barrier of 50% of her health isn't bypassed. When the skill activates, her skill is halfway charged to maximum, and then during the skill duration, with that immense attack buff, she manages to kill enough enemies most of the time to recharge her barrier to nearly full health. This then allows her to sustain her barrier over getting hit for maybe another 20 to 30 seconds, wherein the skill is again back up and the cycle continues. This notably is not dissimilar to how a lane holder acts, given that Penance just regularly autoing the enemies paired with the reflect does make her a very potent lane holding option even off skill. This is one factor that seems really small on paper but actually in practice is huge for quality of life. Off-skill performance, except for units such as Surda which always are on skill, have a huge determining factor in how a unit performs. people frequently choose Mudrock skill 2 over skill 3 because skill 3 just leaks on regular mobs. Similarly, Ebon Hordes on skills a very potent unit, but isn't really cared about off skill because Mystic casters frankly don't feel that good to use. Regardless of how you look at things with the Mud comparative, Penance is still an incredibly solid unit and you can use her in most stages to very great effect. With that out of the way, let's explore the Penance Mud comparative in 2 layers. The first wherein I talk about the differential in low ceiling of Penance and higher ceiling of Mud, and the second layer which I'll be talking about the general use content, i.e. Penance having a higher skill floor. The concession made by my admission that Mud has a higher ceiling is evident in mainly just the past few CCs. CC3 is an excellent example wherein Penance wouldn't have done anything as Mudrock's invulnerability and stun were crucial, and although CC4 was kind of a one-off case, it's still an example where Mud would have done well. In CC5, often regarded as the best designed CC, the difference gets a little smaller, with Penance and Mudrock definitely both having roles in the hypothetical caster-defender comp if CC5 ever reran. CC6 you don't really see much of either, but since Mud was used for her stun in a bunch of clears, then Mud clearly wins that. CC7 it's also a victory for Mud, although Penance would see some use as well in potential strategies, while neither would really see any use from CC8 to CC10. Although this seems fairly damning on paper for Penance, given that hey, if this unit can do potentially more, it's obviously better, right? The difference isn't that huge, and that difference still makes up a very small portion of how you compare operators. If you're comparing operators by that top end usage, Link would simultaneously be the strongest unit in the game while also being the most useless unit in the game. That's where the second layer comes in, split into 3 sections measuring Penance and Mudrock in the general use category. The first section against clumped elites as a centerpiece of your roster, 2 as a general lane holder, and 3 against trickling elites in a low pressure lane. So first on dealing with large clusters of elites as seen in CC3. I'll be using IS-8 as an example because it's a recent event and a friend suggested it. In the case of Penance, she holds the lane incredibly well, requiring no outside assistance outside of some other stuff to clear up the loose end. She only leaks a few enemies towards the end when everything gets incredibly busy, and it's evident how strong her reflect and shield is in this context where she's able to tank all of the elite enemies, including the enraged crossbowman, yet again showing the virtues of defensive recovery. Leaving the clip up to finish, we'll talk about how Mudrock performs in a bit.
There's a threshold you cross when the book starts to turn.
In the context of Mudrock, however, it's a different story. I have to activate skill 3 preemptively to stop some of the enemies from leaking by, even the trash ones, because Mudrock does not have Penance's amazing reflect.
Stars fleet the night, judging the camera by look. There's a dusty old line in the sand, blown to bits by my path. No longer tempting the muse. People can change, I promise I made. Fight over, fight, I refuse.
And in the end, when the elites are about to overwhelm Mudrock, I'm forced to activate skill 3, but when that happens, the crossbowman comes up and kills Mudrock through skill 3.
Don't think that way. Come and go. No longer am I blind on
Of course, if you activated Mudrock's skill 3 when the crossbowman was crossing over her, allowing the stun and immortality to take place, then it would be a different story and she'll be able to wipe the floor. However, that would just leave the earlier elites in place to slip through, while Penance just holds everything. The winner for this is incredibly clear, and Penance is better in this regard. There's clearly some limit to how much Penance can do, because in cases like CC3 where the Grudge Bearers are coming, Mud, Stun and Burst would inevitably be a lot better. However, in the general case, or even the upper bound case for regular content, Penance is more than enough and shines through greatly. In lane holding, it's pretty clear who comes out on top. Mudrock skill 2 is only superior to Penance in terms of brain deadness, but Penance skill 3 is something you can just press off skill and it'll do the work for you. For those people who say Mudrock skill 3 can be a lane holder, well, it's still prone to leaking trash enemies when Mudrock cannot kill them with auto attacks, and Penance skill 3 is still generally better, even in the general context of a trickling enemy lane, given that it's a weaker scenario than defeating many enemies at once, and no lane you're holding will not have a single enemy except the boss. This then places emphasis on Mudrock to do something special for the third category, which is defeating enemies in low pressure lanes with elite enemies. This can be seen in examples such as the Mansfield Break CC map or CC4, when there's a dedicated lane with very few trash enemies and elite enemies. In these cases, Penance truly does fall short because she won't be able to stack her barrier and only work at half effectiveness, meanwhile Mudrock can still get the generalized overall effectiveness of her skill 3. However, Penance losing here isn't even as extreme as you might think, because Penance has double the single target damage of Mudrock at like 600 defense, and these lanes are filled with single elite enemies, never multiple of them. So even though Penance is operating only at half banner capacity, she's still at least high smart in dealing with these low pressure elite enemy waves. Then it's pretty clear that in the second layer, Penance beats out Mudrock by a significant margin. Is it as simple as that? Of course not. Mudrock still has a lot of other applications that I don't discuss in this video, and I will admit that I'm slightly biased towards Penance, given that Penance has just released and this is a video centered around her. However, I've held the notion that Penance is superior for a pretty long time in the past, and I don't think that's liable to change now. I tried so hard to be. So my overall verdict is that Penance is significantly better for the regular player base, while Mudrock still holds a solid spot in the highest echelon of units due to her amazing control capabilities. As always, comments and discussions on the topic are always welcome, and you can join my Discord server linked in the description for more discourse on the topic. If you do join, please remember to tag one of my admins, Clever Shadow, and mock him for not getting sexes, given that he obtained 4 Penance copies in just 20 pools. Good luck for your future banner pools, and I'll see you in the next video, maybe next week, maybe next month, maybe never.